In Toda Musica, the info page can be accessed by clicking on the fort number of the set, highlighted in red. A detailed explanation of all the information available on this page is provided in a dedicated video. In this video, we focus specifically on the concept of rotation, what it means and what happens when you click on the different options in the third line. As shown in Toda Musica, the number of different rotations of a selected set corresponds to the number of notes in the set, its cardinality. The first instance of the set is always the so-called prime form, from post-tonal theory, while the remaining instances are the rotations. For example, for trichords, we'll see the prime form plus 2 rotations, 3 instances in total. For tetrachords, we'll see the prime form plus 3 rotations, 4 instances in total. For heptachords, we'll see the prime form plus 6 rotations, 7 instances in total. Switching from one form of the set to another is visually represented by an animation showing the rotation of the polygon from one position to another on the clock face. This change in position can be interpreted in 2 ways, either as a transposition or as a rotation, as we will explain below. Both interpretations are valid. However, Toda Musica plays the actual sound of a rotation, helping us focus on the different tonal qualities of the same set depending on which note is perceived as the center, or tonic. A clear example is given by the so-called modes of the major scale that follows. The major scale has the structure of successive steps: whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. If we write the C major scale, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The rotation of the scale is shown graphically in this clear sequence. Now, it is clear that, in this perspective, the sequence of the half steps and whole steps change drastically. The actual sound produced by this different sequence of half steps and whole steps is not immediately clear to the ear if we simply start the same sequence of pitches, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, from the second note, then the third, and so on. This is because we still perceive them exactly as the second, third, and so forth, within the same context, the same scale. Only when we consistently start the different sequences from the same pitch can we fully grasp and appreciate the distinct melodies created by the so-called modes of the major scale. Remember, the Latin word modus, used in music, has given rise to 2 different English words, mode and mood. In line with this principle, Toda Musica presents rotations of the sets by always beginning from the note 0C. This approach helps us become familiar with the distinct sounds of each set. It is worth noting that, in the context of traditional chords, these rotations correspond to what we typically call inversions of the same chord. Let's take the dominant 7th chord, or the 427B set, as an example. As we can see, the 4 diagrams represent the root position, along with the 3 traditionally called inversions of the chord. Each has been transposed so that the lowest pitch is 0C, allowing us to focus on the intervallic structure of the different arrangements of the pitches. However, in the case of well-known chords, our brains are trained to perceive these variations in sound as nuances of the same chordal structure. They are all fundamentally dominant 7th chords. This brings to mind the history of traditional harmony. There was a time when what we now call inversions of triads were considered distinct entities, labeled in basso continuo as 3/5, 3/6, and 4/6. It wasn't until the 18th century that musicians collectively agreed to categorize them as triads and their inversions. Today, we grasp this concept entirely by ear. Building on this historical progression, Toda Musica aims to guide users in a similar way, by educating perception of less familiar chords or sets. The goal is to develop an ear for the internal structure of these non-traditional sets, so that we eventually recognize them by ear and assign just one name to sets that, despite sounding very different when rotated, are fundamentally the same. A clear example of distinctly different sounding rotations of the same set is set 4 Z15A. As we can hear, the four shapes sound noticeably different from one another. Nevertheless, they are the same set. Why don't we hear it that way? Simply because we haven't trained ourselves to recognize it. Just as a non-musician might not immediately realize that the inversions of a chord are in fact still the same chord. So in the end, in Toda Musica, rotations represent all the possible different sounds of the same set, depending on which pitch is perceived as the most important.